Hello, Tungsten Miner here. Today I want to talk about power systems in my house. Obviously I've got some machines in front of me which look pretty high-tech and modern and probably require power. I've got a whole bunch over here which likewise require power, and that little guy over there which also does. So I'm going to start off by walking down the basement here and talking about how I generate power, and then work my way back to how I use the power. So you can see some of how I get it around through here, and here we are. Okay, so I've decided for this house that I wanted to try out this thermoelectric generator. And this is a block from Immersive Engineering that generates power by difference in temperature. So I've got lava on this side, which is 1000 degrees, and I've got packed ice on this side, which is negative 200 and something degrees, 273 I think. So the differential between these two is almost 1300 degrees, and that generates, it turns out, a decent amount of power. I believe, although it's not super clear from the documentation, that having multiple sides having a difference of temperature produces even more power. So that's what I've got going on here. Now this thermoelectric generator is this guy right here. So the recipe is mostly these Constantan plates with some steel on top and a copper coil block, which is just copper wire around some iron. So apart from having to be able to generate steel and Constantan, which requires some smelting, and this requires some high temperature stuff and or blast furnace, this doesn't require a lot of materials. It's not super complicated to build, and you only need to build the one block. So that then is connected to an LV wire connector, which is just this guy here, which is some hardened clay and copper. And then that gets routed along to a wire relay, which is the same materials, just less of them. So the connectors are the more expensive, so you want to economize those, and then the relays allow you to move power along pretty cheaply. The copper wire then is just copper wire around a stick, and this is produced by cutting up copper plates, and copper plates are created, whoops, wrong recipe. So you can create them this way, but there we go. The easier way to do it earlier in the game is to use the engineer's hammer to just flatten out a copper ingot, and then that can get used for making wire by using the wire clippers or shears in order to make the copper wire. So you've got some options. Later in the game, actually you should probably just take a look at this. You can use the metal press, which is one of the Immersive Engineering multi-blocks, along with a metal press mold for wire to be able to get copper wire. And this gets you 2 pieces of wire per copper ingot instead of 1. So it's worthwhile doing once you've gotten yourself pretty well established and you're going to be making lots of wire for a big installation. Anyway, so that comes through, this relay comes down to this guy, which is a current transformer. And that's one of these. So here you make yourself a voltmeter, get yourself one of those guys, and then that gets you this guy, which tells you how much power is moving through the system. Now, if you're conducting power to a battery and the battery is full, then the amount of power moving through the system is 0. So this is telling you how much is being consumed, in other words, or being drawn through, or how much is being produced if you're consuming absolutely everything that you're producing. So I think right now I'm producing more than I'm consuming, so the 31 flux per tick is referring to how much is getting consumed. At some point though, I'll see that max out and I'll have to generate more power. So over here then, the power gets transmitted to a thermal expansion energy cell, and this is just the most basic model. So that gets you 2 million RF storage capacity. And you can see here that my amount is going up, which is how I know that I'm producing more than I'm consuming. But you can see it's going up really, really slowly, which means I'm pretty close to the edge. If I add too much more machinery, then I'm going to be drawing off more than I'm generating, and eventually everything will wind down. And that would be actually a pretty big problem for me, and I'll show you why in a minute. So going through the energy cell then, it comes into this room, goes through a relay, And then I've got these different leadstone flux ducts, again from thermodynamics, that go up to the various machines upstairs. So my flux duct, there's a whole bunch of different ones, and I've decided for the time being just to go with the cheapest to build. So a little bit of lead, some redstone, and glass, and you're all set. Then I've got one over here, I've got one over here, and I've got one way back there. I decided to go with moving the power around by wires. One, for the aesthetics. I think it looks kind of neat having wires running through the basement. And two, the wires are a whole lot cheaper. Each one of these copper wires is just one copper ingot, as compared to the recipe you saw for the leadstone flux duct. The copper wire, however, is a little bit lossy, and it's they only stretch so far, and they can only transmit so much power. But they're a pretty good choice for moving power around long distances. And then here, you remember, I've got a whole bank of machines. You can kind of see the bottoms of them up there. Each of them needs power. And so I could have a whole bunch of these connectors and lots of copper cables going one to the next, the next, the next. But it makes more sense to go with the leadstone flux duct for the final delivery of power to these machines, because none of them requires so much power that is more than this could provide. So I can easily keep them all powered just with the simplest sort of thing there. So now I've got power being generated, I've got power being stored, and I've got power being transmitted up to all of my machines. So let's go back upstairs and take a look at what those machines are. I've got a whole mod spotlight on thermal expansion, so I'm not going to cover these in any detail. Just suffice to say that the tooltips are wrong. See, it says a redstone furnace basic, which clearly is not. Energetic infuser is used for powering up handheld items. So now that guy's got full power. Furnace works just like a furnace, except it uses redstone flux for power instead of combustibles. A pulverizer grinds things down, so normally you'd put ore in here and get dust out. It doubles the amount of ore you get, so for every one ore you get two pieces of dust, which each of them, if they go through the furnace, can be turned into a single ingot. So instead of getting one ingot per ore, you get two. Magma crucible melts things down. Fluid transposer is able to fill up containers. So you might melt something, move it over here, and then fill something up again. Induction smelter allows you to smelt metals together at high temperature. So this is how you'd produce steel, for example. And then over here, the compactor I've talked about before, but this flattens things out. So I can make plates, I can make, what else can you use this thing for? Plates and blocks, it looks like, are the principal things. And then, it'll squash anything down that has a more compact form. And then you can use it as a mint, and I've talked about that in a previous video. Okay, so that leaves these machines over here. These machines are all from a mod called Refined Storage, and this is the first time I've used that mod, so I'm still kind of feeling my way through. The nice thing is that it's actually very reminiscent of a much older mod called Applied Energistics. Now, Applied Energistics has moved on, and it's gotten actually a lot more complicated. So Refined Storage harkens back to a pretty early version of that mod, where all it really did was store items electronically. So the principle, if you want to go along with it, is that it's going to work a lot like your Star Trek matter synthesizer, your food replicator slots, and all those kinds of things. The way it works is, remember, I've got power underneath here, so that comes up to power this controller. And then for every device that you attach to the network, it consumes a little bit more power. Now, obviously, wireless is pretty expensive. The crafting grid is much cheaper. The disk manipulator is a little bit cheaper still. The disk drive itself is pretty cheap. And that's the actual storage part. The solderer and the cable. So let me walk through some of these individually. And bear in mind, I've only just started playing with this, so I could be wrong. I could miss something important. But as I go along, I'll try to fill in the details and fix my errors. So this is the grid. It shows you all of the stuff that I've got in my system here. And down here I've got a crafting grid. So there's a couple of different types of grids. Find storage, there we go. You can make just a simple grid, and that just gives you this box that you can look at things in. I've upgraded that to a, where is it? It's a crafting something or another. There it is, crafting grid. So you take your normal grid and you throw it in the solderer, which I'll talk about in a minute, with some other materials, and that's going to give you a grid that has this crafting grid at the bottom. Really nice thing about this is, let's say I wanted to make one of these, let's say I wanted to make a grid. I can hit this plus button and it's going to move items out of this inventory into this grid. Now you can see I didn't get everything in here because I don't have everything in here. There's certain items that are required for this recipe that actually aren't in my inventory right now. So it moved those ones that it could and just skipped the rest of them. But if, for example, I wanted to make something that I actually do have the recipe for, let's say this guy, it's going to move all those things in here, and all I have to do is pick this item off of the result, and I'll have some more of it. So now I've got 4 more of those. I can drop them back in here, and you can see that number went from 30 to 34. If I'm done crafting, I can just clear that out, and now I'm ready to do something else. This makes for really easy crafting of complicated items. So for example, if I wanted to make this 1K storage part, I can hit plus, and actually it seems to already have all of the items I have. So I'm going to say 1, 2, oops, I can't make 2, because I'm out of glass, it looks like. Okay, so let me find some sand in here. Looks like I need to go find some more of that somewhere. Throw that in my furnace. Now, one of the things that you can do, you notice I had to go pull the things out manually. Well, you can use some of these other readers and writers and constructors and destructors and exporters and importers to hook up various other external items like this redstone furnace so that those are available to the system. And you can set up pattern grids and crafters and crafting monitors and things to automatically craft items that you're missing. Now, I haven't started playing with that at all in this mod, but if it's anything like Applied Energistics, which I presume it probably is, then I'm likely to have a pretty good idea of how to figure it out. Okay, so now I've got my 1K storage parts, and I'm actually just going to toss them right back into the grid. And now I want to make a 4K storage part. So I'm looking at this and saying, okay, add all the items, and it adds some of the items, but not all of them, and I can look and say, oh, I'm missing basic processors. And in order to make that, I need to use the solderer. So let's grab these materials and go do that. So I'm going to need printed silicon, which is just silicon run through the solderer. I'm going to need redstone. I'm going to need a basic processor, which is just iron through the solderer. So let me grab my materials here. I want some iron. 1, 2, 3, and 4 of those. I'm going to want some silicon. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those, and I'm going to want some redstone. 1, 2, 3, 4 of those. So as you can see, it's really quite easy to go get all of the pieces that you need, even if you're going to take them off to some other machine elsewhere. So I'm going to finish processing these things and be right back. Okay, here we are, last one. So now I've got my printed silicon, I've got my printed basic processor, and I've got some redstone. And I'm going to toss these back into the machine, and they're going to fuse together, or be soldered together, I suppose, into basic processor. So let's let these all finish up. Okay, last one. Now I'm going to just toss those in and click on my 4K storage part, move items, and now I get everything, and I've built myself a 4K storage part. Now this by itself is not super useful. What I want to do is turn it into a 4K storage disk, which requires that I have a disk and a storage housing. So let's just say I want to add that. Of course I don't have one of those, so I'm going to toss that back in. And let's say I want to make one of these. Now I've got that, and I can click on my 4K storage part. No, 4K storage disk. There we go. Add that, and now I've got a 4K storage disk. So this leads us to talking about the disk drive. As you can see, I've got a couple of disks in here already. I made a 1K storage disk at first, filled that up pretty quickly, made a 4K storage disk. Now you can see those are both getting kind of full. So I wanted to make another storage disk, which I'm just going to toss right in there. And now my capacity went up from 9K to 13K. And that immediately just becomes accessible. Nothing changes in here, but I've now got more capacity. The funny thing though is that those disks each have certain items on there. So we can see here I've got all of this stuff available. And if I were to come in here and just yank this disk out, this disk actually does remember what its contents are. And see that jump? It took out all of the items which are now no longer in here. And you can see there's a lot fewer rows of things available. If I were to come and pull out this other 4K storage disk, now I've got 0% full, which means there was nothing stored on this 1K disk, and nothing had been stored yet on this 4K disk over here. And now the grid is empty, because all of my worldly possessions are inside these two disks, which, if you think about it, is a pretty convenient way to transport large amounts of stuff. If you want to go from one place to another, you can create yourself a disk and then copy a bunch of things onto that disk and then move it to wherever it is that you happen to want to go. And now here's all my stuff back again. Now, remember before when I said if I ran out of power it'd be a real big problem? Well, here's the real big problem. If I run out of power, this system turns off. And this turns off. And that turns off, and all of the things turn off, and I can't get at any of my items anymore. So let that sink in for a moment. You run out of power, all of your stuff vanishes from the game. Now, it will be there when you plug the power back in again. It's not like the disks get erased. But while the power is off, you can't get at those things. And of course, if your power is off because, say, a creeper destroyed part of your power plant, then you're going to have a hard time building that power plant back again if all of your stuff is locked away. So good idea to have backup power, good idea to have battery backup. So this thing here has a reasonable amount of power, but 30 RS per tick, that's not going to last very long. It gives you about 1,000 ticks worth in order to get your power back on, which, you think about it, 20 ticks per second, yeah, that's not a long time. So I've got my battery backup kind of down on the floor over there, which gives me 2 million RF, which should keep this powered for a good long while. Not to mention, my power system doesn't require any fuel. It just generates power continuously from that temperature differential. So, decently good shape as far as that goes. Let's talk about this disk manipulator. So, this allows you to copy things in and out of your system. And in particular, if you've got a disk on it, let's say this one right here, that I want to spread things around. So let's say I put that over there. I can take this disk and I can drop it in here, and you can see the number of items stored is gradually dropping down. So what's happening is it's copying items off of this disk and moving them into this disk, or this one. There we go, that one's now full, so it's going to start moving them in here. So it's kind of evening out all of the contents between one and another. So I don't actually care to do that, so I'm going to move this back here. I haven't spent a lot of time playing around with this, but it has insert modes and extract modes and all sorts of different things. So I think what you can do is to be able to copy things in and out of disks in a pretty controlled way. I haven't figured out what this does yet, but my suspicion is that it's some kind of filter. So I'll go do my homework and figure out exactly what this thing is for. So far I found it very useful that I started off with this 1K disk, and I wanted to get everything onto these larger size disks. And so I started moving things around by copying everything off of this one into these other ones. So this is the solder. Yep, we looked at that one, and we looked at that one. Okay, so this cable here is a way to connect different parts of your refined storage system together. And it transmits both power and data. So you don't have to have a second controller or anything else to be able to connect these things up. Just have some regular cable to connect them and you'll get both. This little stalk on the end here is a wireless transmitter. And what it allows you to do is to move goods wirelessly. And what you need is a wireless grid to be able to connect to it. So right now, I've added a range upgrade, which is another thing you make in the solderer. So you make yourself an upgrade first, which requires an improved processor, which requires that guy. So a little bit of gold, redstone, silicon, some more of this quartz iron stuff. That gives you the basic template, and then you can add in a ender pearl and redstone to get yourself the range upgrade. And that bolsters the range by 8 blocks. And I haven't made a second one, but I'm hoping that if I did, I could pop it in here and extend my range another 8 blocks, and another 8 blocks, another 8 blocks. So it looks like you can go from 16 up to 48 altogether. So what that buys you is now I've made myself this wireless grid device, which is just a regular grid with an advanced processor, ender pearl, some ports. And then you have to power it up. So I drop it in here to give it some power. And then just by right-clicking on the controller with it, it locks it in, shift right-clicking, it locks it in so it's now mated to that guy. So anywhere I am within range, I can right-click and get my wireless grid. Now this doesn't have the crafting grid, unfortunately, but still you can access your items from wherever you happen to be. So as I'm wandering about my house and working on things, and I've forgotten to go grab some material, I can always connect to my system wirelessly and be able to grab anything from anywhere in my house. Now I have a pretty big house, so I needed to add a range extender to be able to get into the far corners of the house. And even still, there are nooks and crannies where I'm still out of range. So I might actually go ahead and make another one at some point. Another reason why I went ahead and added my my wireless transmitter here in the middle of my house. So you take a look at that map in the bottom right-hand corner. You can see I'm pretty well centered in the middle of the part of the house that I'll spend most of my time in. So that is my power system and what I'm using it for. If you like this video, go ahead and hit like. If you want to know when the next one's ready, hit subscribe, and I will talk to you later.